Welcome to the January 2016 episode of RiskStudio. I'm Manoj Kulwal and I am the co-founder and chief risk officer at RiskSpotlight. RiskStudio is a bi-monthly podcast on risk management topics. In each episode, I interview a risk management expert on a key risk management topic so the viewers can benefit from their knowledge and are able to take away some practical ideas to their day-to-day risk management activities. In this episode, I will be interviewing Vincent Tophoff, who is a senior technical manager at International Federation of Accountants, IFAC. Vincent is a professional accountant by training and represents IFAC on various industry initiatives related to governance, risk management, and internal controls. He participated in the revision of OECD's principles of corporate governance. He is currently also participating in the ongoing revision of the COSO ERM and the ISO 31000 standard. He has co-authored many IFAC publications, and in today's session, we are going to discuss the content of a paper he published in May 2015 titled From Bolt-on to Built-in. In this paper, Vincent highlights a common problem many organizations are facing where risk management is not integrated into the day-to-day business activities and decisions. Due to this, risk management is soon perceived to be a burden on an organization instead of something which can add value. He offers valuable tips to address this, which he will cover in detail in our session today. So welcome Vincent for joining us for this session today from New York. I will now hand over the virtual stage to you to share some of the key ideas and solutions you have covered within your paper.
Thank you so much, Manoj, and also thank you very much for allowing me to give you a little bit of an update on a recent publication that we did within the International Federation, which is called From Bolt-on to Built-in. And the idea of this thought paper is that we believe that organizations should manage risk as an integral part of managing their organization. I'm happy to present this paper here today and to tell a little bit about the features of the paper. It's a discussion paper, so it's meant to generate discussion. So anybody who's listening to this and violently agrees or disagrees please join the discussion, and I hope we can get to a better place together. Before I start though, Manoj, if you'd allow me, I tell a little bit about my employer, the International Federation of Accountants, and that's within that organization that we developed this thought leadership paper. What are we? We are the global organization for the accountancy profession. So basically in all countries over the world you have professional accountancy organizations, for example CIMA, ACCA, ICAW, etc., CIPFA. And these accountancy organizations, you'll find them in all countries over the world, and together they form the International Federation of Accountants. So we are international organization representing not individual professional accountants but the accountancy organizations. We do have about 175 member bodies and associates in more than 130 countries, and we represent 2.5 million professional accountants in public practice, in commerce, industry, financial service, public sector, education, and the not-for-profit sector. In addition, we are public interest focused. That's sort of aligned with the mission, if you'd like, with professional accountants who typically also work in the public interest, as they're backed up by a code of ethics, and public interest is a strong focus point of us. So what is it that we do? Within IFAC we develop a lot of standards. I think we are quite known for facilitating the development of international standards on auditing, ethics standards for professional accountants, education standards, international public sector accounting standards. We also make sure that these standards are being adopted and implemented all over the world. We support our member bodies in supporting their professional accountants, their members, in doing the right thing within their organizations. And we provide a global voice and promote the value of professional accountants worldwide. And we have specific interest for those accountants who don't work in an accountancy firm, and we call them professional accountants in business. And those are all the professional accountants who work in industry, for example, or in commerce, or not-for-profit organizations, or with the government. And these are a number of the topic areas that we deal with within IFAC. Obviously, we deal with audit and insurance, but also, and I think more interesting for this specific webinar is we deal with governance and ethics questions, risk management and control, sustainability, corporate responsibility, financial management, business reporting. So basically, it's the sort of a whole array of things that the professional accountants are working with in supporting their organizations and creating and sustaining value. So that was a bit of an introduction, Manoj. Now let's get into our thought paper. And the thought paper, as I said before, was called From Bolt-on to Built-in, Managing Risk as an Integral Part of Managing an Organization. And this paper was actually created because of we saw that risk management in many organizations throughout the world seem to have deviated from its original purpose. Is what I always say, and that's a nice example, I think, is, did you know, Manoj, that that babies, newborn babies, that they can swim? It's interesting, if you have a newborn baby and you were to throw the baby into the water, I would not recommend you doing it, but what you would see is that the baby would swim automatically, and it can do so up to a couple of months, and it's only until the baby realizes that it's not supposed to swim, then the baby sinks. And I think it's a nice comparison with what we typically see with risk management. Is we typically see that you know, people, individuals, as well as small organizations, they are sort of a natural born star with respect to risk management. And that's probably also because action and reaction is very close to each other. If you make a bit of a mistake, you clearly see the results quite quickly. And so that means that both people and small organizations, they learn quickly and they seem to do the right thing. Well, you know, evolution tells us also that that's the only way to survive. It's people being pretty good, and that those are the ones that that survive. The frustration or the challenge that we noticed is that it seems also for smaller organizations who were pretty good in risk management, once they sort of grow a little bit and they start formalizing their risk management arrangements, is then you'd expect them to become better, but instead they seem to become worse in actually managing risk, and that intrigued us, and we asked ourselves, okay, what are some of those reasons? How come that happens? And let me show you here a couple of the reasons that we found. We found, for example, that now organizations, they start to treat risk management, internal control, as an objective in itself, and you can clearly see that, for example, this is where organizations now all of a sudden implement a risk management system in their organization. So like it's not, you know, something that's part of what they're doing anyway, but now they have a sort of a separate system that they're going to implement in their organization. Is you also see quite often that risk management arrangements are audit or staff driven, so that there is someone in the organization being appointed is hey, you are the one that now needs to help us implement risk management in this organization. Rules-based systems is, you know, organizations, for example, through this American legislation, Sarbanes-Oxley, who are now all of a sudden forced to implement either risk management or internal control arrangements. Off-the-shelf systems is, we'd love to have a risk management system, and it would be great if we could find a consultant that just could present us one. It reminded me always strong on what happened 10, 20 years ago, also with the ISO 9001 quality systems. This is where, you know, organizations you know, just overnight were able to implement a quality system and then could proudly say, hey, look, we have a quality system and we are also ISO certified. risk management focused on loss minimization is so focused on the negative of risk. Risk management arrangements that are typically implemented with hard controls, mechanical controls, ensuring that loss don't happen, as ignoring the sort of the whole cultural part of risk management. Imposed compliance, we have to do it, and that's why we do it. Is standalone systems. That's what we call bottom. So it looks like there's a sort of a system within a system. Yes, we do have a risk management system, and as part of the risk management system is we do our annual risk identification, our risk assessment, and then we develop a risk register and we populate it, and then once we have done it, we put it back on the shelf and we move on. The problem with these kind of systems, also, the descriptions of the shelf systems is that they not really alive within the organization, and that they, they just live a sort of a paper life, if you'd like, and well, while the organization moves on, the system stays behind, and that means that you got sort of an out-of-date system, out-of-touch system. The problem with all these kind of risk arrangements is that they typically don't contribute really to the creation or the preservation of value within organizations. They only cost money and time and resources. So, then it's quite negative. People, they do see these and they interpret these kind of systems or arrangements as something that's hindering them instead of then supporting them in achieving their objectives and being seen as overhead. You typically then also see is that people, in their daily activities, in their normal routines, they don't bother about risk management. And, well, that's not for them. That's for the risk management to do. Well, I hope that that some of these courses, they resonate with you, that you've seen them. And there are probably many other courses, but these are just a few of them that we noticed. And we thought it was a pity, because through all these things organizations might overlook the enormous value that the good management of risk can bring to their organizations. And we tried just to put a foot in the sand and see if we could make a bit of a change here, and that's why we developed this paper, from bolt on to build in, and see if we could turn things around a little bit. We started doing that just by having a look as what is it then effective risk management? What do we understand by effective risk management? And well, we think risk management can only be effective if it truly facilitates the achievements of our objectives. And here's the link. This is that risk management is not something standalone, but it's clearly linked to supporting us in our organization in properly setting and achieving our objectives. Of course, it also helps us complying with all kinds of legal and societal expectations. And of course, it enables us and our organization to better respond and adapt to surprises, disruptions, and changes in the environment, which is a sort of a continuous happening thing. And well, then the next thing is, that might be true, but how would we be able then to sort of get this effective risk management within our organization? And that's the title of this paper, is from bold on to build it. We truly believe that if Moses does not come to the mountain, maybe we should bring the mountain to Moses. And that's a little bit of a cryptic speech of saying, if people in organizations just don't want risk management. We've been trying now to implement risk management in organizations for 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, and but just people, they just don't want it. They just want to go on with what they're doing in their organization. So we've been thinking, if that's the case, maybe turn it around. Instead of us asking them to follow our processes, maybe we should just look at what their processes, what are people doing in their organizations, what is it that they typically do on a sort of on a daily scale, on a monthly, and then see if we can instill some of our good risk management practice into their processes. So that's the from bolt-on to build-in. Is instead of us asking them to follow our processes, we now try to say, okay, let's have a look at their processes and see how we can instill some good risk management practices in their process. This is the paper. You can download the paper for personal use free of charge from the IFAC website, which is www.ifac.org. Or if you just Google the title of the paper, including the word IFAC, you can find it. And you have to sign up, but once you sign up, you can just download it, the paper for free. What I'd like to do next is I'd like to walk you through some of the tips that we gave in this paper. So the overall tip is that we are not presenting a risk management framework or risk management process in this paper, because then we step into the trap that we just try to avoid. Is then we ask people again to go through our hoops. Is what we really try to do in this paper is to lay out a typical management decision and execution process that a lot of organizations follow in their daily routine, and then see how we can instill risk management into that process. So we really try to turn things around a little bit. So in the next couple of slides, let me give you a couple of tips that we formulated in this thought paper, and that should really help you by integrating management of risk into the as a sort of integral part of managing your organization. And the first, and maybe the most important one, is focus on your organization's objectives, because it's quite simple. It's the objective of your organization is not to have effective controls, and it's also not to have an effective risk management system or to effectively manage risk. But instead, is the main objective of your organization is to properly set and achieve its objectives, and to better adapt to surprises and disruption, and ultimately to create and sustain value for its various stakeholders. That's why your organization is alive. That's what it's meant for. And risk management and internal control are there to support that journey. And should not be at the forefront in that respect. Is we made this little whirlwind cycle here. What you could see is that it's all focused on achieving your objectives. Over time, you see, once you set your objectives in the beginning, you are sort of faced with a sort of a high level of uncertainty, broad level of uncertainty, and through these typical plan, do, check, act actions, most organizations manage their way to achieving their objectives. What I liked about this triangle, and I stole it from somebody, said, well, if you have the triangle here, you see that risk might, push the triangle out of balance a little bit, and that's the little arrow at the left. And controls might help you to stabilize the triangle and to make sure that your processes continue to be in place in order to properly set and achieve your objectives. There's also a deeper point in this little diagram is that you see that we did not use the risk management process, but we use as the basis of our thing is the typical plan, do, check, act processes that happen within an organization, and you see them on various levels. As a lot of organizations have this sort of long-term strategic plan, do, check, act. They come with a strategic plan, then they implement and execute the plan, and they have a sort of monitoring. These are the overlapping 2-3 year plans. Within those plans, they have the shorter strategic, tactical planning, And then there's much smaller operational planning cycles, the monthly planning, the quarterly planning, the monthly planning, the weekly planning, even the daily planning and the hour planning. Is the thing is that all these plannings, they overlap and they happen in between each other, and they all typically form this sort of plan, do, check, act. This is, you plan something, you execute it, you see how things work compared to what you planned before. Some things worked, something didn't work, you monitor, you review, and then you adjust accordingly. And now what we say is, if that's the case, then maybe we should identify, assess, treat, report, monitor, and review risk always in relation to the objectives that we would like to achieve and the way that we do it in our organization. And another very important part of that is that we always have to look in this context that might change internally, externally. Is our initial plan might not be the right one, and maybe we have to change our objectives. Let me give you a nice example of how important it is to focus on achieving your objectives rather than to focus on risk or the individual risk. And let me do that by explaining it through a famous Dutch song. And I'm from the Netherlands, so this song is quite dear to me. It's about a Russian family traveling through the taiga on a horse carriage, as you can see here, and the family is being hounded by a pack of wolves, and well, they're in a deer situation, and they need to race to safety. The problem though is that the wolves are catching up, and then the song is about the father and mother discussing which of the children they have to throw out of the carriage to keep the wolves at bay, and also to make the carriage lighter so that it can go to safety faster. The song is quite cruel. They're discussing, shall we sacrifice Anna? And then the mother says, no, Anna plays the violin so well, so maybe not Anna, maybe Joseph. And then Joseph got to go, and they throw Joseph out of the sled. The point, though, from a risk management perspective, is what should these pairs focus on? Well, their immediate focus should be on trying to reach the first place of safety, the first town. That's what they should focus on, and they should focus on what is it that might prevent them from getting there, or what is it that might help them getting there. Those are the right questions to ask. Alternatively, what they could have done, and that's what you typically see in sort of a lot of risk management assessments, is that they turn backward and try to identify every wolf that's out there in the forest. And you can clearly see that's a very inefficient and ineffective way of dealing with the situation, because there might be wolves out there 3 miles away, and well, they're still wolves. They are irrelevant for them at right that moment. The song ends very tragically, because they have to sacrifice child after child after child, and then at the end, unfortunately, they're being eaten themselves as well. I do think, though, that it provides a very sort of graphic and good image of how important it is to look forward and to see what's in between you and achieving your objectives, and how much more important it is than try to identify every risk that might be out there. You can also see that with another example is that you can take every noun out there and then put the word risk behind it, and you've got a new risk category. You have meeting risk, you have financial risk, you have liquidity risk, you have debtors risk, you have and that makes the list of risks, if you'd like, endless. We think that although sometimes it might be good to just have a look at the various sources of risk, is we think you could better, and it's more effectively, more efficient to turn it around and to focus on what it is that we would like to achieve, and then what can help us getting there and what can prevent us getting there.
So Vincent, thank you for sharing this example. So, I think in this story, what you cover is you're covering one context where they are already in the journey, but another context in the same story would be maybe when before they start their journey, they need to evaluate that if they have two or three ways to get to the final destination. How do you see they should be evaluating before they start the journey? Because right now with the context is that they already have the risks are in front of them, they're already implementing, they can see the wolves, but maybe they should be thinking about risk management even before they started the journey, right?
Yeah, that's a good question, Manoj. Fortunately for me, is that the song only starts when these people are already traveling. But you're completely right. Is what we noticed, and I'll touch upon it a little bit further in my presentation. Is it seemed that quite a few organizations they do their typical risk rain dance only after they set their objectives, where we think that arguably the most risky thing in an organization is actually setting the right objectives. So for that reason, we urge organizations not to wait with their risk management process until after decisions have been made. For example, where to go and which route to take in your example, but already, you know, ask those questions and do proper risk identification assessment while you're sorting out the objective. What is it that we would like to achieve? And that's something that we also stress in our thought paper is that it's not something that you should do as an afterthought, but risk management actually helps you in making proper decisions about what it is that you would like to achieve and how to achieve it. I hope that's a good answer for your question.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think you're saying the point about, yeah, the context, and I think that context is very important. That I see a lot of time organizations will do risk management without understanding the context of the business, and risk management is done for the sake of it, rather than for supporting a business decision or for achieving an objective. And I think, yeah, this is a good example where before they start the journey, there is a risk management needs to be done there, because there you may have to be aware of where the wolves are in the whole jungle, so you pick the right path to get to your final destination. But when they are on the journey and they've already picked a path, then the context has changed, and then the risks for that particular path would be very different than what they had done before they started the journey. So I think the context element is very important, which I see normally is missed out from when you're doing your risk analysis.
Yeah, well, you're completely right there, Manoj. And I also think that it should not be a one-off. If you do your risk identification analysis while you're deciding upon what it is that you would like to achieve and how to achieve it, that's only the first step. Is you need to continue to do that. Is I see the internal and external context or environment a little bit like the kaleidoscope. You might remember from your youth, this glass thing that you can look through. And what I noticed, every slight turn of the kaleidoscope gives a totally different perspective on the environment and changes the environment. So the internal external context are sort of ever changing thing, and you need to be sensitive to any changes that are happening in those internal and external context, and assess how that might influence what you set out to achieve and how to achieve it. It might, in the end, it might also lead that you give up your original objectives, because you find that you can actually get into a much better objective, much more desirable, or you might have to change your process, etc., etc. But it's a sort of a continuous process, and that also tells you that this typical annual risk management rain dance that quite a few organizations do, it just doesn't do the trick, because they're following their process and their objective, and they're working on a day-to-day basis. Is they limit this to once a year.
Yeah.
No, we typically think that risk management should play a role in all those cycles that I said earlier, all those plan, do, check, act cycles, be there strategic cycles, be there the shorter term tactical cycles, operational cycles, daily cycles, even individual decisions.
Yeah. One more topic, Vincent, I would like to cover is in one of the
Sure.
earlier slides, you talked about adapting to surprises. So can you expand on that a little bit? Because sometimes some organizations think that if we do risk management, then we basically we are there will be no surprises. We are trying to bring surprises to zero.
If only that were true. But I think if you look at evolution and history, Manoj, is that what you typically see, it's not the strongest of species that survives, it's not the most intelligent species that survives, but it's those that are most adaptable to change. And then, you know, change comes with opportunities and threats, and if you are able to turn, you know, to somehow mitigate those threats and take advantage of those opportunities, you can get yourself from into a better position than you were before. So that's where you have to strive for as an organization. This is the second tip that we'd like to give, is make the objective owner also the risk owner. And that might sound like an sort of obvious, but it's not always the case. We saw in quite a few organizations that risk managers, chief risk officers, the risk management function, risk management team also had a sort of a line role almost in identifying, assessing and managing risk, and then we think something is going off track. As risk is inherently tied to setting and achieving objectives, is also important that those people that are responsible for setting objectives are also responsible for managing the related risk. It cannot be that some people, you know, are responsible for setting and achieving those objectives, and that they can delegate the responsibility for the related risk to, for example, a risk management function. That just doesn't work. Imagine that you were to sail from the UK to the United States, and you have some safety concerns, and you would step up to the captain of the ferry, of the cruise boat, and you'd ask her or him that you'd like to have a conversation about the risk involved in this voyage. And you wouldn't be happy if the captain would say to you, well, Manoj, great questions, please refer to our risk manager because he is in charge of managing our risk. And you would tell the captain, no, that's not the way it goes. You're the captain of the ship, and that means that you are also responsible for managing the related risk to this voyage.
Yeah.
We think that line management really needs to accept its responsibility and should not be allowed to delegate risk management to staff departments. Having said that, we believe that the risk management function, or the risk officer or the chief risk officer, plays an important role in initiating, facilitating, supporting good risk management within an organization. But on the other hand, and that's the lesson of that we try to give here, is that they should not assume line responsibility for risk. Let me explain that a little bit on this little picture here. Let's rethink our 5 lines of defense. And you know, you probably heard of the 3 lines of defense. We stretched it a little bit, and this example, to 5 lines of defense. And we also like to talk about offense, because it's just like in the football or the soccer game. It's the same with an organization. You know, we are not there purely to defense, but we're there to score goals. That's the ultimate objective of the game. So we changed it into the 5 lines of offense. What do you see here? Let me explain a little bit. On the picture you saw a football or soccer team, and there are various kind of roles there. First of all, you do have the players, you do have the captain. of the team. Also, there's a coach involved, the referees, and then there's the sort of the national soccer or the football associations, and of course the international ones. So if you know where to transpose those typical football or soccer roles upon what you see in an organization, you could compare the players with the operational staff in your organization, the captain with the supervisor or the line manager, the coach maybe with the risk manager, the referee with the internal auditor, and the football soccer association. If you now look at those roles, there's something interesting, is that it's only the players and the captain that are actually on the field, and they form the line. So those are, the ones who are only directly able to score the goals. Yeah, and so that also explains why the management of risk typically needs to lay with him initially. And yes, all the other players, they do play an important role in achieving the team's objectives and to make sure that the team wins. Yeah, but they do it in a sort of a support role. That's the risk manager is a support role, the internal auditor and the external auditor. So, and the same what you see on the soccer field, the football field, we believe you should see the same in an organization if we're talking about who is ultimately responsible for setting and achieving organizational objectives and managing the related risk to that.
So one question here, Vincent, I get in my training courses generally is you say that the objective owner should be the risk owner, which I think works for most of the cases. But I think there are some cases which sort of get discussed on my course where some risks may be very specialist type risks. So if we take one example, that if I'm responsible for or head of sales of a online retailer organization, then I am exposed to the cybercrime risk. But then as head of sales, I don't have any knowledge about how to manage that risk. So I need to delegate the ownership of the cybercrime type risk to my IT security team, that I cannot be the owner as the head of sales. I cannot be responsible for the cybercrime risk because I have no clue how to manage that risk. So how do you see this delegation element where, some risks, they're just so special that the objective owner may not want to be the risk owner of such specialist risks?
That's a good question, Manoj, but I think the answer is quite simple. Is yes, you can delegate tasks, but you can never delegate your responsibility away. Is the marketing manager or the sales manager in your responsibility might look for support elsewhere, internally or externally, in managing this specific risk, but ultimately he or she stays responsible that it's being adequately managed. And at most, I think that going back to the example of the ship, that makes it clear is, of course, on a big cruise ship, you cannot expect the captain to have detailed knowledge about every bolt and everything that's happening on the ship, but ultimately he or she has the overall responsibility for making sure that you have a safe journey and that you arrive safely in your harbor of destination. So what I mean by that is that yes, you can delegate certain tasks, but then the person who's delegating the task still needs to realize that he or she is still the owner of the underlying risk and needs to be sure that it's being managed well, either directly through him or with support of people inside or outside the organization. Another tip, and that is an obvious tip, is that we strongly suggest that organizations should tear down their risk management silo. And what do we mean by that? Is what I said earlier is, instead of us, the risk management function, imposing sort of typical risk management tools and processes onto our people, is just to make them go through the risk management hoops, is we should, turn it around and see if we can adapt our processes so that they better suit the needs of the other people in the organization. And what do I mean by that? What do we mean by that is that we think that we should integrate our risk management steps in their processes of, for example, decision making and subsequent decision. So it's not requiring them to come to us, but us coming to them. Do you have any questions here, Manoj?
Yeah, so one question here, Vincent. So one of the paper I read recently was that over time, what has happened in the last 15, 20 years is that a lot of regulation was imposed from outside, but the way the risk management and the control management discipline has evolved, a lot of regulation has now been imported inside the organization. So if you look at the compliance function or risk management function, they're basically doing the job of enforcing what the regulators want. So we basically, like now, we have internal regulators inside our organization itself, and the regulators want that side of the business, to not be that integrated with the rest of the business. And there are even cases in financial services where the chief risk officer doesn't report to the CEO; they report directly to the board, because the regulator wants that independence view from the risk management world. So I think there is a balance here, right? That from a regulator perspective, there is still some risk management which is needed, independent of the rest of the business. But I also see the point that not everything has to be separate, that a lot of risk management can be bought in the core business. So do you want to just comment on that balance?
Well, Manoj, I think that your question goes back a little bit to the various roles that we discussed earlier, with the soccer or the football team. And again, is all these roles, they all these functions, they play an important role in the organization, but we should not confuse who is exactly responsible for what. And I think if you look, for example, at the internal audit role or the risk management function, if you like, is, for them it's ultimately important to see that the risk management arrangements in the organization actually work, is that the organization is capable itself of identifying, assessing, and managing the risk related to their business, to setting and achieving their objectives. And if in that case, for example, it's necessary that sometimes they poke themselves a little bit into the matter, and just to have a sort of independent backup to see if all relevant risk is being identified and assessed sufficiently, I can imagine that. But all those arrangements, they should not distract us from the core principles, is that it should be those responsible for setting and achieving the organization objectives, also in financial institutions, those are the ones who are ultimately responsible for also managing the related risk.
Okay. So then I agree. Then I think that's a good a point, where what we are saying with this tip is that the actual ownership and the management of risks on the day-to-day basis, should happen wherever that risk exists, and not necessarily within the risk management department. And then the risk management department is there to facilitate, to provide a level of governance and that independence view in terms of whether those risks are being managed correctly within the business. So I understand your point now, because in a lot of organization, the risk management team actually manages the risk, which I think is what you're trying to say here, that that's not where risk should be managed. It should be managed where those risks exist in the organization, and that's typically in the business processes, in the decision making processes.
Yeah, clear. And I have some hands-on experience there as well, because in my my time as a consultant, I also used to work for large organizations, financial institutions, and for example, used to work out of their internal audit department, and then sometimes line managers, they came into our office and say, well, you are so knowledgeable about risk, and you think that we should do it, why don't you come and do it and help us with that? And then we would say, well, we'd be happy to help you and to facilitate you and to show you how best you can do it. But frankly, we are here in the basement in the internal audit department. It's your process, it's your insurance process, it's your finance process. So we can support you and show you how to do it, and look, just assess how you're doing it, but we cannot assume the responsibility for you, the risk that you are running within executing that process. And then they typically would understand that very well. As many of you probably know, implementing risk management arrangements in organizations, you have to reinvent the wheel yourself. There are quite a few pretty good frameworks out there, standards that might help you in evaluating and improving your risk management arrangements in your organization. What we noticed through our sort of global context is that many entities, they use the COSO frameworks, the Enterprise Risk Management Framework, or the Internal Control Framework, and or the ISO 31000 framework. We always recommend organizations to have a look at many frameworks, at numerous frameworks, and not to focus on one, and then just to see what works best for them. And what we typically saw in quite a few organizations is that they mix and match the frameworks a little bit, and take from each framework what works best for them. What we try to explain here in this slide is we just post the COSO framework a little bit against the ISO 31 framework, and well, the first thing you see is that the COSO framework is quite lengthy. It gives a couple of hundred pages of information, whereas the ISO 31000 standard is really short. You see some other examples here. If you look at the long or short, you should also realize is that the ISO 31000 might be too short to really understand it. I noticed over the years that quite a few people, they think they understand what's meant by ISO 31000, but if you ask a little bit deeper, you question yourself whether they really understood what was meant by it. It doesn't really matter. I think both frameworks, as well as other frameworks out there, they might help you in just assessing where you are with risk management in your organization, and also help you to do it a little bit better. What you might know, Manoj, is that currently both the COSO ERM framework as well as the ISO 31000 framework are being revised. And what we argue is that it's good that there are more frameworks out there. It gives just a little bit more of color and your thought leadership. But if these frameworks are being revised, the only thing that we would argue for is that the underlying concepts of these frameworks should be a little bit more aligned. And what do I mean with that is we think it's important that organizations should be able and continue to be able to use both frameworks at the same time. They should not be sort of conflicting with each other with respect to terminology or fundamental concepts. So we call upon the leadership, both at the COSO camp as well as the ISO 31000 camp, is to communicate with each other and to see if that at least at the underlying concepts and terminology they could find some sort of alignment. For us, the risk management community, I think the good thing is that these frameworks are out there and we can use them in our organizations as to further good risk management practice.
Yeah, and I fully agree there, Vincent. Especially, I think at the level of a basic risk that what is defined as a risk in COSO, where potential events here with negative effects on objectives, while ISO 31000, is both positive and negative effects. So ISO 31000 is focusing more on uncertainty. So even within these two global standard, they differ on such a basic concept of what is a risk, which doesn't help then the practitioners who are trying to use this guidance if there is a disagreement at that basic level within these two standards. So I hope that the alignment happens in the round of revision, which is happening right now. To also address the point you talked about ISO 31000 being too short, Vincent. So I also agree with that. Something I can share with the listeners is Australia and New Zealand published a more detailed guidance called HB 436, which is actually, I think, 100 plus pages long, where it really goes into the details of how to implement ISO 31000 and what to consider. And of course, that level of detail is not there in the main standard. So for people who are looking for that details on how to implement ISO 31000, you may want to look at the HB 436 document published by Australia and New Zealand.
Well, thank you, Manoj. And I actually have read the document, and I've also found that it's a very good and practical guidance that you're mentioning there. So I would surely recommend that. There's one thing though I'd like to say about both frameworks, is that both frameworks allow organization to implement risk management the right way. We say is like a built-in risk management arrangement within the organization. They also allow organizations, and that's the negative side, is to do what we think is the wrong approach, is to build a sort of a standalone risk management system, because they come up with a very prominent risk management process. And if you don't just understand and get it and do it wrong and start implementing this sort of standalone processes, then you can smile and say that you have a risk management system within your organization in compliance with the standard, but you did it fundamentally wrong. So if there's one slight point of criticism that we have, that I have on both of these standards, is that they're, they still work from, as the center of gravity is their own risk management process, and they're not sufficiently emphasizing that it should not be a standalone process, but it should be fully integrated in what organizations are already doing. So you see in both standards is that they say it with so many words that risk management should be integrated, but then the next thing they do is they present this standalone risk management process. So there's a little bit of contradiction there, and I hope that that contradiction can be a little bit clarified or solved in the next editions of both frameworks. Tip 5 is an interesting one: manage risk from the start. I think we already touched upon it, Manoj. Is that you should not wait with managing risk until after you have set your objectives, or until after you've made the decision. A good example is that strategic objective setting as such is probably the activity that involves most risk in organization. So please don't wait until you have set those strategic objectives and then do your risk management brain dance, but make risk management an integral part of that decision-making process to establish those objectives. Unfortunately, you see that quite a few organizations, they understood that lesson. Is they're not going overnight with making an important decision, but they really look at the various options that they have, the various scenarios. They really identify the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the threats. They look at their own capabilities. They look at their competitors. They look at the rest of the external environment. They come up with different scenarios, and most likely outcomes. You know, they do all those things, and interesting enough is we believe that that is good risk management, doing those things and just making sure that you just not make a decision on the fly, but that you have a sort of a well-grounded, well-based decision. And so people say, but that's not risk management, that's good management. And there we are, Manoj, that's what we mean. Good risk management is good management.
Yeah. So something which comes up on training courses, Vincent, when I sort of mentioned this point is that it's obvious, you know, that when we are anybody who's making a decision, consciously or unconsciously, we do think about risks because that sort of is just the human nature. So what is missing here? That is it that we need to make it a little bit more explicit, that maybe it's very implicit in the way we make decisions, or when we are making these decisions, maybe we only look at certain type of risks. So if I'm setting up a new factory where I have to invest, you know, millions of dollars over the next 10 years, I may focus more on the financial risk of the decision and not so much on the people or the process risk. So what do you see is missing? Because everybody, when they're making decisions, they are considering risk. What else can be done? What can be done to sort of make it more explicit?
Well, I think now you hit the nail on the head, Manoj, and that leads into tip 6, is that we really think what's important, you know, is to make informed decisions. Is because, you know, as risk is the effect of uncertainty on achieving your objectives, is how the way you can minimize uncertainty is by just getting better information, better data. Is the better your information, the better the data, the better your preliminary research you did. Is the less uncertainty, and to better your decision probably is. So is what we really think is that decision making and subsequent decision should be professional. And we quite often say, well, how did you come to the decision? And then we say, well, this decision is based on professional judgment. And frankly, I think it's a bit of a scapegoat for many organizations, that they just, you know, went with a gut feeling, whatever. But that's not a professional judgment. Professional judgment must always be professional, and that's where risk management comes in. Is, yes, Manoj, you're right, is most people, they take risk into account while making a decision. But what we think is that good risk management helps you to do that in a more structured and more effective way, is that you really make sure that you have looked at the situation from all sides, taking into account the developments in the internal and external environment. So yes, it's right, most people are already doing some form of risk management while taking decision, and we stretch it a little bit first. The main objective of risk management is to enable organizations to make better decisions and to have better subsequent execution, monitoring, review, and adjustment of the process. So we are not saying that you need to do a totally additional process, but we think that the tools that we bring as a profession, as a risk management profession, actually support people and organizations to do what they're doing, but in a much better way. Yeah, well, that also flows into this decision-making wheel that I'm showing here, where you typically see sort of the processes within an organization. And earlier in this conversation, I called it plan, do, check, act. We use a little bit of different terms here. If in very generic terms you would say, what do you see within organizations, how do they set and achieve their objectives, then typically that's something that they before they make a decision, they start with some sort of preparation before making a decision. Then they make an actual decision. Then once the decision being made, then you have to put into place people, processes, resources, and actually start setting out what you're planning to do. during the journey of where you are to achieving your objectives, is you sort of continually have to monitor and review not only the process but also what's happening internal and external in your organization, because that's the ever-changing environment, and then you have to adjust accordingly. And learn from the experience and put that back into the phase again. That's why it's a cycle, you know. It's because these learning elements they lead to maybe new decision making, etc., etc. So what we did in this thought paper is okay, maybe our good profession can really help is making these sort of decision and execution processes better. What we do in our paper is we do give a number of sort of risk management questions that you could think about while you're in the various phases of decision making. If you allow me, Manoj, I'll give you some of these examples. Is before you're able to make a decision, you know, you first have to prepare for decision making. Now, what are now typical questions that you can ask there? Is for example, is define what outcomes we are trying to achieve and the relation to the organization, the overall objectives, and define how we will measure them. Yeah, we also have to consider who will be need to be involved in the decision-making processes and in the actions that will follow. And will there be internal people, will there be external people, etc., etc. So then we move on to the decision-making process, and then, for example, it's important that we clarify and agree on the key assumptions and presumptions about the decisions and the outcomes. So we should also, before we make the decision, consider the range of things that might occur or are already present that would prevent us from achieving our objectives or help us to achieve our objectives in a better way. So what we did here, and you know, I'm reading now from the paper, and that doesn't really work, so I strongly recommend you look at the paper. In every phase that we have here, we came up with a sort of a 10-12 typical questions or actions that you should ask, and that is really to the heart of this paper. And again, I cannot say it often enough. It's not us forcing people in our organization to go through our risk management hoops, but we really try to turn things around. Said, well, if this decision-making wheel, if these are generally the steps that most people take within an organization, okay, then let's take that as a basis and then see how we can infuse good risk management practice into those steps. That's the bottom line of what we're trying to do in this paper. So another tip here, Manoj, is that we strongly recommend organizations to remain sufficiently agile. I think that we already touched upon this earlier. Is as it's not the most the strongest of species that will survive. It's not the most intelligent, but it's those that are most adaptable to change. You know, however you plan things, whatever you plan, there will always be sort of a surprise coming out of a corner there, and the more capable and flexible you are as an organization to identify that quickly and to respond swiftly to that, and ideally turn that into a benefit for you, is the better you will be to survive and to be able to achieve your objectives. Then we come to one of the final tips. That's tip 8. Always question, communicate, and consult. And this is a little bit of a cliche. You know, we always say that we have to question, communicate, and consult. But I think it sort of automatically flows out. What we were saying before is you know, we work in an organization together with other peoples, with internal and external stakeholders, and we have a common body of knowledge. And you know, if you want to make a decision, then it would be best to tap into the knowledge of all those people. So if you make a decision on your own without adequately consulting your internal and external stakeholders, first of all, what they want to achieve, what it is that they would like to achieve, and then to how go about it, is if you are not sufficiently leveraging the common body of knowledge that's out there, is you're just shorting yourself, is you're just you make a lousy decision. And also on the process is, you only have 2 eyes, but your organization has maybe 10,000 pairs of eyes. It would be stupid not to use those eyes, because they are telling you the real story, internal and externally. Let me also illustrate that on a sort of a nice example that I found about how internal controls, sometimes do not the trick that we would like them to do. There was a nice experiment about 10 monkeys in a cage, as you can see on the picture, and in the cage there was stairs, and on the top of the cage, on the ceiling, there was a banana. So when they put the monkeys in the cages, the bravest of them raced up the stairs and grabbed the banana. But by grabbing the banana, he triggered a cold shower that the researchers have implemented in the cage. So by taking the banana, the monkeys were treated on a 10-minute cold shower, and well, they learned their lesson quickly. This was something that they never had to do again. So what the researchers did next, in the next step, is they opened up the cage. They took out one of the monkeys and they put a new monkey in. And the new monkey came in the cage, looked to the left, to the right, greeted his fellow monkeys, then looked up, saw the banana, saw the stairs, and raced up the stairs. But before that monkey was on the second step of the stairs, the other monkeys in the cage, they grabbed the new monkey and tore him down the stairs and told him that was not the way to go, that he should not go up the stairs. So nothing happened. Then the next day, the researchers opened up the cage again, took an old monkey out, put a new monkey in, and the whole process repeated. Looked around, left, right, greeted his fellow monkeys, saw the banana, raised up, was held back by the other ones. So the researchers, they repeated this process day 1, day 2, day 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then the 13th day, they did it again. They took a monkey out, new monkey in, and the same ritual happened again. The lesson, though, after 13 times, is that at that time, none of the monkeys that were in the cage had ever experienced what could possibly go wrong. Is because nobody of the monkeys in the cage, they were all new, none of them had ever experienced the cold shower. But they were doing this control procedure just out of a sort of a habit, if you would like, and they didn't even know about the underlying risk that they were trying to prevent, and they didn't know why they did the control in the first place. And to me, this, you also see it quite often in larger institutions where mid-management typically changes position quite quickly. And then you, if you're lucky, then the person who was preceding you in that position has a couple of days to talk you into your new position, and they might say, well, on Friday you have to do this and this and this control. But if you don't understand the process, if you don't really understand sort of what the risk involved is, and then it's very difficult to also effectively sort of assess the effectiveness of the controls that you're doing. And things get even worse because we don't live in a static environment, but the environment is changing all the time. So that means that we periodically and maybe sometimes continuously have to have this conversation with people. Is what is it that we would like to achieve? What is the risk of that might prevent us from getting there, or might support us getting there? And what should we do in order to better achieve our objectives? That's a sort of a continuous conversation that needs to go on. And for that reason, I think that the old cliche of continue to question, to communicate, consult about these things is more true than ever. And again, we don't do that through our risk management process, but we turn it around. We think that should be done through the regular management process in organizations, and with risk management we try to support that. Yeah, here's some more tips. Finally, is what we would like to see is that we kind of look at our risk management jargon and see if we can eliminate some of those terms because they might be well understood at the risk management community, but you really can ask yourself if they are understood by the other people in our organization. So if we want them to support them, I think that we have to speak their language, and frankly also a lot of the language in our profession is quite confusing. So let me give you a nice example. A famous term here is that we have to determine the risk appetite or our risk appetite. And to me, that's a very confusing term. As I think if you I know it's being used by quite a few regulators, but frankly, I think if you go to 5 different regulators and you ask all 5 of them what exactly they mean by risk appetite, you might get 5 different answers. And now, even if you were to go to one regulator and you would ask 5 people within that regulator, and ask them how to define risk appetite, you would get 5 different answers. Well, if you get these different answers from standard setters and regulators, how can you expect from organizations that they have a sort of a clear view of what's meant by risk appetite and what it is that they're supposed to do? So I see quite a few risk appetite statements out there, and I really question whether that people actually understand what they're doing, and if that's really helpful for those organizations to better manage their risk. That's just an example. I think you can. We have a little bit of a list here where we try to collect nice terms, risk propinquity, risk clock speed, for example. So if you do have one of those beautiful risk management terms that nobody understands, feel free to send them email to us, and then we are happy to place them on our list. Last but not least is I think that quite a few people they're looking at us is if we can really sort of support them in doing better risk management. And what I mean by that is that they're looking at us to see if we can give them sort of how-to recommendations. For that reason, in our thought paper, we came up with this this series with practical questions that you can ask. But it might also mean that that you sit into a decision-making process or execution process within your management team, and just support them by asking what are the questions that you would ask. And the same applies, for example, for boards of organizations. Directors, they also can be supported by okay, we are here facing an important strategic decision. What is it that I'm supposed to ask? What are the right questions to ask? And I think what will be an eye-opener to quite a few people, that we don't ask them to go through a sort of a whole new discipline of risk management or through a whole new process called the risk management process. No, instead we are really supporting them in doing their job better. And we tie on the questions that they already would be asked in such a conversation. We only try to structure that a little bit better, and just to give them a sort of a more fuller sort of scope, so that we get sort of a more fuller based information on which they can properly make a decision and execute it after that. So if you allow me, I would like to wrap it up a little bit. Is what you see here is on the left hand side, you see the list of things that typically go wrong in many organizations with respect to risk management. And we think that if we slightly tweak our approach a little bit, is that we can also change from what typically go wrong to what could go right. And And these are the sort of if you were to do this, just little tricks is that we can really help our organizations in getting it right. And I think most of them are quite obvious, and we discussed most of them. Is not having risk management internal control as an objective itself, but instead is implementing risk management internal control in organizational process to help achieve objectives. It should not be auditor driven, but it should be driven by the line, and ideally top down. It should not be based on rules, but it should be based on principles. What is it that we'd like to achieve, etc., etc. I hope that that this slide resonates with you, and I'm sure that you and your colleagues are working, helping your organization to go from the left side toward the right side. And with this paper, from bolt-on to built-in, managing risk as an integral part of managing an organization, we hope that we have made a little bit of a contribution to supporting you and your organization in getting it right. Well, that's in short what I had to tell, and now I invite you all just to go to our website www.ifac.org and download the paper and read it for yourself. After you read the paper, we would be really looking forward to your suggestions and comments, because that's how how we get better together.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for coming and sharing the ideas from your paper with our listeners today. There are some very valuable tips and guidance within the paper, and I hope the listeners are able to implement these and further enhance the value their organization is deriving from investment into risk management initiatives. Thank you very much, Vincent. I look forward to welcoming you again in the near future on another risk management topic.